Hey guys, so today's before you read lesson should be pretty familiar to you. We've talked about it a few times. Our lesson today is going to be on compare and contrast. So before we even get started reading the story, I'm just going to give you a heads up on a few things that you're going to be listening for so that you can be ready to compare and contrast when you get there. So behind me, you'll see a Venn diagram. Right? So when we're comparing two things, we have the one thing that is different, and then the other thing that's different, and then in the middle, we have the things that are the same. So using a Venn diagram is a very common way to go through and compare and contrast some things. So in James and the Giant Peach today, you're going to meet Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. You don't know anything about them yet, but you're going to want to pay attention because one of the things that you're going to be comparing are the two ants. So you're going to be comparing Sponge and Spiker. The other thing that you're going to be comparing is you're going to be comparing James and his life living with his aunts, and then other children and how they typically are living. And the other thing you could think about there is James's life before living with his aunts. So we have James after living with the aunts and James before living with the aunts. So that's another thing you're going to be comparing and contrasting. So we have two things so far. We have our two aunts, we have James with the aunts, and then James before he lived with the aunts. And then the last thing that we're going to be thinking about comparing is we're going to compare and contrast the centipede and the grasshopper. Now, you're not going to get to know these insect characters very well just yet in my section. You're going to get to know them a little bit more when Miss Perna and Mrs. Demontis are reading to you, but you're going to know enough about them to start to be able to compare and contrast them. So before you listen to the story, I wanted to tell you that, but now let's talk about how to make a good comparison. It's real easy to just say surface level. Like let's say you're comparing Mrs. Reeves and Mrs. Perna. It would be really easy to just say, well, one has blonde hair and one has brown hair. And maybe if you're comparing people, you could say one wears glasses and one doesn't. Those are sort of surface level compare and contrast. And yes, those are important. You can talk about physical characteristics, absolutely. But we want to be getting into a little bit deeper of comparison, of comparing and contrasting. So we want to be thinking about what are their personalities? What are their character traits? What are their likes and dislikes? How are they behaving? How are they treating other people? How are they treating the main character in the story? So when it does come to Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, and again, you haven't listened to the story yet, but it's to get you thinking before you even start. When it does come to Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, what does that look like in their treatment of James? Okay, so what are the same? What do they do that's similar? And then what do they do that's different? So we're looking at the treatment of other people, we're looking at the circumstances that are going around, and we're also going to be able to make some inferences and think about, well, that must mean blank. So again, we're going to be doing some comparing and contrasting, which you guys have heard before, but the challenge for you is to be able to go a little bit deeper, and I know you guys can do it. So just to review before you go listen to the story today, we are going to be comparing Sponge and Spiker. We're going to be comparing and contrasting James's life before he moved in with the aunts and after, which could also be James's life with the aunts versus other children. And we're going to be comparing two new characters that we're meeting, which are going to be Centipede and Grasshopper, which we don't know a ton about them yet, but Roald Dahl tells us enough about them right off the bat that we can make a couple comparisons right there from the beginning. So that's your before you read today. You know what to listen for and what to look for when you start listening to the story today. And the next stop is going to be to read the story, and then your last stop is going to be after you read. All right, have a good one.